Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to the 169th episode of the Shipping Podcast. I have been doing this for 6 years now. My first episode was released on July 31st, 2015. Time flies. Starting the Shipping Podcast has been a labor of love, sleepless nights, and the beginning of many new relationships. I have met so many people I would not have met or come in contact with if I hadn't embarked on this voyage. And I've learned so many new things. Things I didn't know about this industry. Sometimes I expected to find more, but I never found it. I have met hotshots, and I have met the little people. They all have a story to tell. They all work in the maritime industry, and they have interesting, fascinating jobs. And the one thing they all have in common is that they love their work. They have a passion for the industry, and they are willing to share their story with you and me. When I celebrated my first 5 years as a podcaster last year, I made an episode with clips from some of my guests. If you want to listen to that, search on the website for my name or look for episode 142. There are some great clips in there. A couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Captain Thomas in real life for the first time. His ship had to deviate to the port of Gothenburg, and he asked if we could get together. So we had a cup of coffee, and we shared stories about why we are so eager to speak up about our industry and all the things that comes along with that. I told him about my journey as a podcast producer, and I started to think about all the guests that I have met and how some of them have influenced me and taken me to where I am today. In the beginning, I invited the guests I counted as my friends. They supported me in this new endeavor and accepted being interviewed almost before they knew what a podcast was and how I would make it available. I wouldn't have been able to do those interviews if I hadn't had a broad business network before setting up the Shipping Podcast. At this point, I was doing all interviews in person. I went to different events and I brought my microphones. You would be surprised what happens when you set up recording equipment to get influential people to agree to be an interviewee. I edited all my interviews myself for the first 3 years. It takes forever to edit a podcast episode. Think 3 times the end product, at least. Finally, I realized that I could continue to work with other things and earn enough money to hire an editor. For 3 years now, I have the best podcast editor in the world. Her name is Jen Eads, and she lives in Indianapolis. And I know I could not survive without her, so thank you very much, Jen. After traveling to shipping events for a while, I realized that it was usually the same people I met. Of course, I will not say that I have interviewed every person attending the same conference as I have. Still, I owed the audience, which was growing rapidly right now, to find people elsewhere to interview. I then decided to travel to one city at a time and contact the people that I knew were living there and asking them to participate. This was also a way for me to try and reach my goal of having 50% men and 50% women on the podcast. I started by going to Oslo and invited all the 10 women to watch in the maritime industry in 2017, the ones that Young Shipping Oslo and North Shipping awarded as the 10 women to watch in 2017. I'm sure that these women, Ingrid, Christine, Liv, Nina, Stine, Thea and Therese, found it a little bit surprised that they were approached by me and invited as guests. But they were laureates, and they probably realized that when I gave them a platform to speak up and represent the women in the maritime industry, it was an opportunity not to be missed. Besides chasing people and inviting them to speak about themselves, I have a few close friends who have helped me open doors, advise who to talk to, and helped me develop an even more extensive network. One in particular, I will not tell you who that is between us, but I am forever grateful. I could not have made this journey without that support. When the pandemic hit, I was slightly blown away, just like the rest of the world. As for so many other people, I had to rethink the shipping podcast and how to do interviews. With the help of my editor, Jen, who is a wizard when it comes to sound and equipment, I decided to do my interviews online. By now, I had got a few competitors, or what you want to call them. I want to be very clear. I welcome all other maritime podcasters to the podosphere. But it was important to me that the sound of the shipping podcast was equally good as podcasts in any other area. I am ambitious. I want people to find the shipping podcast on their podcast platform of choice and become curious about the maritime industry and listen to what my guests and I have to say. I cannot move behind lousy sound quality. I'm too picky. And since it's my time that I spend listening to podcasts, if the sound is terrible, I just delete the podcast from my queue and don't want to listen to it. I did not want that to happen with my listeners or my prospective listeners. So I was first hesitant to start recording online. What would the sound quality be like? I know this is silly, since I know so many podcasters who interview up to 5-6 people every day and don't have a problem. But since I had Jen, I am ahead of everyone else. I just knew that part of my secret sauce was to create an intimate moment with my guest and make the listener feel like they are eavesdropping on our conversation. This is feedback that I have received so many times, and I was afraid to lose that. The flip side of recording online is that I do not have to travel, and I don't have to restrain myself to interviewing people in my part of the world. So I started to think about a few people around the world that I wanted to talk to, and I sent out invitations. By now, people understood the power of a podcast, so I didn't really have any problems getting people to participate, unless they were employed by a large organization where they had to have the permission from the communications department. Of course, and that is fine with me. I always tell them that I'm not a journalist who is out to get them. I am out to make them shine like stars of the sea, and I want other people to listen to them. Now I think I have reached a point where I have more problems fighting agents and PR bureaus who wants me to interview their clients. It can be a CEO whose company is their client, or someone who published a book and their agent is contacting me to interview this for me unknown person. I have declined almost all of them. This is not the way I see the future for the Shipping Podcast. None of the more than 165 guests so far have paid to be interviewed. There is no pay for play. I have never agreed to do an interview unless I am curious about the person introduced to me. Of course, I'm not stupid. I realize that introducing ads in the podcast would allow me to pour more money into this project. But with sponsors comes demands. Some people have approached me to pay money to do a takeover, to just get the straight line to you. They want to reach my listeners with their advertising. I have declined that. I have had competing podcasters asking me to carry their message, but they don't want to pay for it. Large companies who wish free benefits from the get-go from me doing this out of pocket. I have asked myself so many times if it's worth it. Producing a podcast for free when hardly anyone realizes the impact that I have on my hand. I reach so many people, especially young people. If it wasn't for my stubbornness and belief that I can make a difference, I wouldn't have done this for 6 years. Add some curiosity and believe in free speech, and there you have my driving force. I can do this. It's a democratic way for me to reach so many people in so many countries. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of my success story. If you want to contribute, please send me a photo of yourself listening to the Shipping Podcast, or suggest to your management team that we should collaborate. There are so many ways to collaborate without giving up the freedom to decide who will become a guest on the Shipping Podcast. Right now, I'm planning interviews for the autumn. There will be a focus on ports. I think that is very appropriate. If you have suggestions for topics and/or guests, send me an email to hello@shippingpodcast.com. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out.